Okay, handling difficult moments. So if you would go to page 24 of your Better Angels Red Blue Day Long Moderator Guide. I've kept you waiting long enough for the most challenging part of doing the Red Blue workshops. In the manual, I have a lot of material about how you do routine channeling. Like I said to you at the beginning, that if at the end of the 30 seconds it looks like you're gearing up for your next point, that I'll signal you. I often do this as a kind of a gesture to sort of bring it to a close. I did that a couple times with you all here. So there's the routine kinds of things. I have to say that in one day-long workshop, at the end, during a checkout, we each have 30 seconds, and yours truly went on a little long. And so a number of the people in the group went, and then I knew we were home free. Because the spirit of this, and David has helped me understand this well, the spirit of this is that as the moderator, you're doing this for the group. You're not doing this, is not an ego trip, this is not, like I'm in charge, it's for the group. And so when I sort of, like this, the group went probably back. So when the groups bring the moderator back to the ground rules, that's a very good sign. That's a very good sign. So in the manual are a lot of those tips. A lot of you have done facilitation and have those. That's not what I'm doing. Here I'm talking about more difficult moments. So people veering off the question on the table. You intervene as quickly as you realize it, as soon as you realize it, and steer the person back, even if it's in the middle of a sentence. This is one of the hard things for many facilitators, people training even in facilitation, who are nice people. And nice people don't interrupt. Just like nice people don't tell the guy at the workshop, we're not debating this now, buddy. We're going, right? So you, as soon as you realize that somebody is veering, and so Andy Andy has an acting background, and he said earlier, if I needed anybody. So I'm going to ask a question of what everybody learned from listening, and then I'd like you to sort of start charging off and kind of go with me in this, so don't give me trouble. But I'm going to just show how early. So the question now, after we've done this question exercise, is what did you learn about the other side, and did you find some things in common? So who would like to start on that? Andy?
What I learned is that the Republicans really, they don't have any sense of emotion. They don't have any
so
sense
Andy,
of...
I'm going to stop you. So right now what I think you're sharing is your evaluation of the other side and those opinions you have. What the question at the moment is, what did you learn from listening to them, and anything you found in common, rather than your evaluation of what they're going to say, what they say. Okay. So as soon as I heard that, I intervened. What's the downside of letting him finish?
He'll insult you.
What's that?
There's an insult.
Well, he's about to deliver one, an insult. It could have been he's just going to say, I think they were wrong about that policy, and he's starting to go off there. So he gave me a good strong one because it was an insult. But it's not always that. It's just, So what's the disadvantage of waiting?
Often the first person models everyone to follow.
Yeah, you betcha.
Viral.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. And so, but I could, and in fact, I don't know what I would have done in the past, but I've had to learn this. It's not obvious to stop him in mid-sentence. That's some of what I'm. Okay, so let me hone my question better. We all agree I have to steer in a different direction. More specifically, I'm asking, why not wait till he finishes a couple of sentences? Why not wait for him to make his point?
You don't know when he's going to be.
I don't know when he's going to stop.
Right.
For one. Yes, so
nodding,
he
going.
could keep going. Yes.
It can kind of poison the well, like it just could create some ill will in
Yes.
the room, and then you can't take
I
that away.
want to cut it off.
Right.
I mean, we're all saying this listen, but I'm putting an urgency on it, that as soon as I see where he's going, I call him by name and I redirect him. And this is, I've had a lot of facilitators who have trained facilitation who really don't want to stop somebody in mid, like the first sentence. As soon as I hear it, I'm in, as opposed to like let him even finish a nice long sentence.
I think it really is hard, particularly for Minnesota.
Minnesota.
As a
I'm from Philly originally. So in Philly, be yo, Andy.
Yeah, I was born and bred, so.
Yeah.
But I think what would make it easier for us if we had language and ideas how to soften it a little bit.
Yeah.
So it's not just, I'm going to cut you off, you know.
Mhm.
What are some ways to be a little gentle with it, with the person's self-esteem and ego?
So what I can say, giving feedback on this college, that I've never seen, it doesn't look like people's self-esteem is off. It's just sort of, it's clear and direct with no animosity.
I think it's hard when the person that's doing it is someone that feels marginalized for some reason
Mhm.
anyway.
Yeah.
Either because of being part of a minority group,
Right.
being the only woman in a
Right.
mostly men group, whatever it is,
Right.
there are people that could do that who themselves may feel marginalized.
Yeah,
And that's where it gets tricky.
it absolutely, this is not easy. This is not easy. Andy?
I think that maybe the self-esteem hasn't been challenged because you didn't say you're doing that wrong. You just said, let's try to, what I hear you doing now is this, but the question is that. So it's not attacking me, it's just attacking what I'm doing, and not even attacking, it's just redirecting.
Yeah, that's the key. The thing I've learned is if I let somebody go on too long, I start to get anxious, and then I'm more apt to be negative. And it's more of a blow to somebody's self-esteem to go on, and then say, Andy, that's not what, we're doing something different.
Yeah.
Because I've got a head of steam.
What I did not hear you say is I'm sorry, which would be the very first thing coming out of my mouth.
Yeah, I'm
Oh,
sorry.
Andy, I'm so sorry, I'm gonna have to cut you off.
Well, if the thing is, we have to all deliver this through our personality. And I don't rule that out. I know you a little bit. I think you could do that assertively and say that. And there's some things that we do through our personality, our gender. So I don't, because everyone knows it's not an apology.
Oh,
The way you just did that was not an apology. It was a regret to have to do something hard.
Yeah.
So I didn't have any negative reaction to what you were saying. But it would be like after I did it, if I said, I'm sorry, sorry,
Yeah.
that would be the tentative. So I didn't have any trouble with what you did, Susanna, on that. And I think people have to do it through their own personality. You walked up here, I assumed you wanted to say something.
Aren't you going to cut him off, Bill?
Yeah, so, okay, I'm checking there.
This is really hard for me to learn, and I would let people finish the sentence. And I noticed two things about what Bill did that I've tried to learn. One is there's no affect. He does not communicate annoyance. He's just a guy who's just got a job. There's no you've done something wrong. I'm annoyed. You're messing my moderating process up. There's none of that. There's no affect, and I think that's really meaningful. And the other thing is, bam, right away. And I forget the verb, but I've seen you do many times. It would be so Andy starts, and it would go, Andy, I need to structure this a little bit differently, and just like look, but it's no, just like we're gonna do it. I got to do it differently here. You got to do it differently, and then it's quick, and it's no rebuke of Andy. It's just like I've got this job, but you got to stop now. Boom,
Well, it creates safe boundaries. You're putting fences on the conversation, which makes everybody else feel
Right,
safe.
so it's the thing I said before that groups like to be facilitated and individuals don't. Right? That's an old accent. That's individuals, so everybody, and I'm the same way. I love it when somebody sets structure up, except when I got something really brilliant to share that people deserve to hear. Okay? So I think in the back and then Dave, yeah.
I think that when you do it the way you did, the rest of the group is relieved.
Yeah.
Because they're watching you
Yeah.
to see if you're going to hold the
Yeah,
number.
that's right.
And it's a huge relief. And
Yeah.
you're gaining not only, shifting it to a topic,
Right.
but the respect of the whole.
That's right, and everybody feels relieved. It's like when the first grade teacher manages Johnny in the back who's pitching a fit. Yes.
Bill, how would you respond to the question? Somebody says, "Well, but Andy was just giving an honest response to the question. What are you taking with you from your time today?" How would you respond to that? About why?
Yeah. So usually, what these are what I call editorial opinions that are that's I wanted to make my point about, and that's what I'm listening.
And what clued you in to the fact that was an editorial, not an honest response to?
Well, it wasn't dishonest, but it was an evaluation. That was what I said. It felt like an evaluation that they don't really get it, and that's not what we're looking for. And usually people say what I learned was, or something that struck me was, and they usually preface it as something related to the question. And you sort of started that way and then moved in a different direction. So actually, nobody has ever challenged me on it in a group.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Now, you could look at a video of it or something like this and say, well, how close was he?
Yeah.
And it's a judgment call. It's a judgment call.
How do we distinguish between, are we looking for a positive learning from this? And how do we, like if we hear somebody start talking about something negative that they learned, is that when we...
Well, usually, I think the question, what did you learn from them, calls for positive or neutral. What I learned was that, the government, programs are really important to them. I mean, that would be a neutral, okay? Or it reaffirms what I know, that'd be neutral. But when it goes into an evaluative thing, I bet you he had the same opinion before he walked in the door, and that did not emerge from that, listening to that conversation. So I'm listening for what feels like a standard opinion of the other side, but mostly it's an editorial opinion. Okay, so this one was actually a little bit harder because it was punchy and it was kind of insulting to the other side. It's fine, right? It gave us a real challenge. Mostly it's I think they said some good things, but the thing about immigration is it's really
Right.
That's usually the way it goes, right?
That's right.
It's usually like
It's going off on dilating on my opinion on a topic as opposed to focusing on the activity you just completed.
Yeah. There was one group of particularly intellectual folks in Ithaca, New York, College Town, where I used the term editorial opinions at one point. They were doing it a fair amount. And so by the end of the day, I was saying, Andy, I think that's an editorial point. And what we're doing now is, I actually used for that group, that shorthand, because they were doing it a fair amount. The other thing is in the back about the group feels better. I remember in San Diego, where I had to do it a fair amount with the Rotary people and some others. At one point, this goes back to the marginalized group, so it was an African-American man, really interesting guy, who went on a fair amount. So I had a couple times, pull your point together, but just as I did to some of the white people and all that. But at one point, and the thing was, it was interesting, he was so interesting that there was a part of me that wanted to hear what he had to say on that, okay, even though it was not on topic. He was a very interesting guy. And when I stopped him, and he was perfectly fine with it, I also then said, equal time, because I had stopped a bunch of blues before, and I stopped a bunch of white people before, and so there was this sense of that this fairness to all. When you do that, and I'm going to give an example in a minute of more difficult when somebody has a lot of affect. Okay, here it's simpler when they're giving an opinion, but there's not a lot of affective charge behind it.
Just very quickly, I just don't. There are times when it's perfectly fine for them to say critical things. I mean, we've had people in the checkouts who say, I came here thinking that these people on the other side were, bigots and horrible people, and I'm basically, haven't changed my mind. I mean,
One person said
one person said that. I'm saying that there are. I'm just trying to say that there are some moments when you want the people to. They can be they can be negative, but not when it's not. I'm trying to make a distinction between the editorial nature of what Bill was cutting you off on, and it wasn't like you can never say something bad about anybody unless you're cut off.
So we had somebody say, what you learn is that I feel like what I got out of that is I don't think we have much chance to come together.
Right.
That's pretty strong.
And you let that go.
Yeah, of course.
Yeah.
That was this person's feeling.
Yeah.
And it was so interesting because some other people in the group, this was on one of the weekends and somebody was having a down moment, and some people on the other side, this was a blue saying this. In fact, he said, I feel like I'm at enemy camp. That was at the end, the checkout at the end of the first night. And some Reds said, oh, don't feel that way. I mean, they just sort of spontaneously reached out. It was actually a sweet moment.
Yeah.
But that was, he was just being honest about how he was feeling. So the next one, this is harder now. People become emotionally reactive when they veer off topic. Okay? So the examples here, and most of the time, it's somebody wants to get their point out. But here it's, it's best to acknowledge the intensity of the person's feelings and then redirect. So the example I give, I can see how, well, I'm going to just enact this. So Jody, if it's okay?
Okay.
So you don't have to do anything. You pay attention.
All right, okay.
Yeah. So you don't have to, I'm just going to describe it. I have to look at somebody in order to do this.
Here.
So you don't have to actually do it. But this was in Ohio, in the summer tour. And a woman from a Muslim country, an immigrant, who was in the fishbowl, being very powerful in her personal statement about how bad things were, how much she hated Trump, and just let her say that. In the, I think it was. What did you learn from the fishbowl? I think that was the exercise. She said, I don't know if I could stay in this country. What's going on? I wake up every morning, I'm afraid for myself, my children, and I hate those people. I hate what they're doing. Okay? And so I looked at her and called her by name. So I said, Joni, you're speaking something from deep in your heart, and the pain you're feeling is really, really clear. And we're going to have to move on to the question of what people are taking with them. And I acknowledge this is deep for you. This is deep for you.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
So I had to touch her feelings.
Absolutely.
Okay, I had to touch her feelings. She was saying something deep in her heart, and that's where I could have said, I'm sorry to have to move on. Because I was expressing regret to have to redirect at this moment. Okay, that at the moment what we're talking about is, and then if I do that with somebody, you betcha I go up to them afterwards and see how they're doing. She gave me a hug. She was fine. She was fine. In the second Ohio workshop, when Greg, who you saw there, Greg as in Greg and Kuyar, the buddies. He had, if you remember, and I hope we have this on the video, after a young man. So this was an interesting moment when I allowed somebody. I didn't intervene when on Saturday morning, it's a young man in the blue group used a moment when the group was talking about what they learned to say that he was gay. And it was clear to me at some point he needed to say that. And of course, the agenda didn't say, let's all go around and talk about our sexual orientation. Okay? And so he needed a way to say that, and he did. Okay? So I just accepted that. That was, it wasn't the agenda at the moment, but we're going to be together this weekend, and he needed to say that. Well, Greg got activated by that. And do you remember, do you remember what he said?
Well, he said something. He made a very strong personal statement about abortion, because in his mind, he talked the gay young man talking about saying he was gay. For Greg, he was taking offense to. He said, "Well, how can you be okay with you want children, but then you want to terminate the life of children?" And then he made a very strong personal statement about how this was personal for him,
Right.
an abortion.
Yeah, so
Almost in
that's-
tears.
So the gay man was hoping to have children someday, and then that activated. And this was a challenge because Greg was at the end of the table. And so once again, what I said was, and you guys may remember better than I called him by name and looked at him and said, you're speaking from your heart about something you have great passion and conviction about, and I want to acknowledge that. And I also want to say that at the moment we can't stay there. We have to come back to this other thing we're doing. And then at the break, I went up to him. He was okay. He gave me a hug, And then he told me more of the personal stuff. Okay. So that's the payoff for me. Is if you can make the connection emotionally and then redirect and check in with somebody. And if I don't do it right, if I don't do it well, and I misfire, then I apologize. You don't have to be perfect at this. And then I'd be willing to say I really misfired, and I'm sorry. And then I can repair. You can repair. But it doesn't happen often. But it's good to know what you might do. So to summarize, this is if it's opinions. And somebody needs to redirect, and you just acknowledge and then you redirect. If it's a deep feeling, you have to touch the feelings. You can't just stay at the chairman of the chairperson of the meeting. Then you have to acknowledge the feeling. Number 3, someone challenging the structure or process. So you saw that in the skills workshop. So when are we going to get to ask questions of the other side? This occurred last week in the 3-hour red-blue workshop. And it wasn't question of clarification. Are we going to get to, it was, are we going to ask each other questions? So it was a challenge to the structure. And I said no. In this workshop, in this 3-hour workshop, that's not in the plan. I said in the day long it is, but not here. And so I looked at it and I said it, and then I just moved on. He did not look like he liked that answer. And I didn't say, I'm sorry, right? And I didn't say, how's that going down with you? I just moved on. He interrupted in the middle of the ground rules to pose that. And I took it as a sort of hijack attempt. Okay. Not because it wasn't a decent question, but because he interrupted the ground rules. He didn't let me finish and then say I have a question. It was an interruption, and it was with some oomph. Like, when am I going to get to put these people on the spot? And I just said no. If pressed, or this happened at the first Ohio weekend when we were all so new at this darn thing. When a woman, one of the Blues, said a couple of times, when are we going to get into a policy thing? Like, and it's understandable. People think they're coming to discuss policy. And I said, no, we're not going to do that. And so actually, for her, the third time I did explain it more, and I can talk about that, because she said it about 3 times. But if pressed, you can also say you're expected by Better Angels to deliver the workshop as designed, and you're not prepared to change the focus of the workshop. This would be like, why can't we? Why can't we just, Charlottesville, why don't we do Charlottesville instead of this agenda? Okay. You can fall back on you're doing this workshop, okay, and that you're not prepared. If you happen to have an answer, like that's for the longer version, you could do that. You don't debate and you end the exchange quickly. There's nothing worse than being in a workshop where there's an extensive debate about the structure of the workshop. We've all been in those, okay? And you can you'll start to see the group chairs move back. And so you have to be authoritative on this. And again, it's different from somebody just asking a little question of clarification. Because then you say, no, that's not in this plan. When you're getting a challenge, you just have to meet the challenge and say, that's not what we're doing. Example, I hear you'd like to try such and such. What I could say, and this is now you press more, what I can say is this workshop is designed to do certain things and not other things, and that we're going to follow the agenda as laid out. Make eye contact while saying this, and then release eye contact and move on with the agenda. So I just went right back to the ground rules. Do not ask if the person agrees. Now, whenever I do these sort of challenging moments, I always think about, like, what's the worst case scenario? Worst case scenario is other people jump in. Oh, I think that's a really good idea. Okay, so I always try to think about that. So I have something in my pocket. And what you don't want to do is, well, this is a democracy. Who would like to? Okay, right? You can see why that's not a good idea, because the other people are going to say, what the heck? And it's going to be chaos and anarchy, right? And this is risky stuff. So here's my version of it. If people started to gang up, I would go, folks, this workshop has been designed in this particular way. This is how I've learned to do it. It's been used all over the country. And I would like to do the workshop as designed. And I'd like to ask if you are on board with doing it as planned.
What if they say no?
They won't. They won't, I promise you. If they did, I'd say, well, then why don't we stop? Okay, but they won't. They won't. Because they came, they won't. Yeah. But it's like, I'm not going to, notice I didn't, it's, the two of you were on this, okay? And I'm looking at the whole group, and I'm asking for an affirmation to proceed as planned, because that's what I intend to do. There are other issues going on if that doesn't work. So anyway, I've never had to do that. You probably won't have to do that, but it's just always good to know. And you see that is kind of democratic, because I'm defining what I am prepared to do. They have the agenda in front of them. And if there was a revolt going on, then I'm asking, what are you going to do? What are you going to do here? Well, I'm not going to do it your way, that's for sure. I mean, it's either this way or we go home. So I've never had to do that. There would be something else going on if it did. But I'm just saying, I always like to have, if somebody was melting down, really melting down, my ultimate backup was to say, let's take a 5-minute break, folks. And then I'd go over to them. So I've never had to do it, but I went into a very tricky public meeting once where that could happen, and that was in my hip pocket. Because I did not want somebody melting down and me trying to help them in the middle of all these 70 people. So my ultimate backup was to say, let's take a break, folks, and then go up to them. I've never had to do it, but it gives me confidence. It's sort of like, if somebody goes into cardiac arrest, I mean, what would the CPR be? Yeah.
Might you say, this comes to my mind logically, but I don't know. Might you say, well, the people who want to do it can stay, and people who don't
that would
want
be another one. Yeah, I'd like that. Yeah. So you're happy that we can take a little break and you can leave if you like, but this is what we're doing. That'd be another way to do it. Yeah.
Are there models of you doing that with groups on the online samples that you have, so that we can watch them and then kind of rehearse them ourselves?
Yeah.
This is a real big
For the Ohio one, the students were so good. I didn't have to do anything with them. But we have the Ohio workshop, and we have 5-hour segment of it now that we can make available, because there were a number of times when I had to do that.
Okay, that would be very helpful.
Yeah. Yeah, that's right, that's right. So lastly, when someone is dismissive of the other side, like I didn't learn anything exactly like I thought they were, or my take home is that the other side deal in emotion, not logic and facts. These have happened. Just acknowledge that what the person said and move on to another person. Don't invite them to elaborate. So for you, Joni, you didn't really get anything from that? Okay. So let's move on. She just said I learned nothing? Or, you know, like the guy in the checkout, they're just like I thought they were? Okay, let's move on. Okay? You don't ask them to elaborate. Now I have to tell the story from the last Thursday when a woman said, one of the bred women said 3 times, I didn't learn anything. 3 times, I counted them. After both exercises and at the end. She was the one that didn't like how I flipped the coin earlier. And so I just acknowledged and then moved on. Okay? And then the other woman who had invited her, a former student of mine, came up to me and apologized for inviting her. And I'd never heard anybody like all 3 opportunities. And here is the rest of the story. She emailed subsequently my former student and her friend said, I really enjoyed that. And the explanation was she has a lot of blue friends and she had already heard people say all of those things. So literally nothing was new. I think she lacks a little interpersonal sensitivity about how that comes across after people have just opened up. Okay? So that was the gap. It was her interpersonal sensitivity. She was like, so we did Algebra 1, and actually she's a math major. Okay, so saying I didn't learn it. That's how she was taking it, very kind of cognitively and concretely. But I had, of course, developed my hypotheses about her, which were not true. Anyway, that's an interesting. But I had to hold on to my reactivity at that point. Like nothing. 3 friggin' hours? This is my 25th workshop, and I learned things. This is your come on off the street 3 times. That's what was going on. Okay, I think it's time for a break here. Yes.
Related to this sensitivity, what about when someone says something or uses a term that is so offensive?
Okay, good.
And it's going to trigger people.
Yeah, that's great. And I talked about this a bit in the manual. And help me on this one, David, because this is really important. We do not protect people from stereotypical language. In fact, in the second Ohio workshop, a couple of people used the word colored people.
Yeah, good example.
That's not 21st century language. Okay? There was an African American woman in the group. I did not correct that. Okay? There are people who will use stereotypical language, or they'll talk about their work experience with low-income people who just don't try. Okay? And they get trapped in poverty by the welfare system, and they're just not trying anymore. And I feel bad for them. This came out of a fishbowl. I didn't intervene at all. Didn't say anything. Now, what's interesting is the guy, the main guy who I knew, who in the Ohio group, who used the term colored people. Other people went up to him, and then later on, before we finished, it'll probably be on the PBS thing. He publicly apologized to the African American woman for using the language. And so I let them work it out. And in another case, I go up at the break. I go up to a person who I think might be in a group who might be trouble with that, and I check that out. And that's what I did there. And that woman said, "Hey, I've heard worse," and I got a pretty thick skin. And so there is. If the thing is, if we are doing too much language policing, then it's going to be really tricky to accomplish our goals. In fact, we decided on the stereotypes exercise to pick, we picked one person to do the presentation, because in the first workshop, we were very democratic, and we said, who would like to present on question number 1? And the Reds had the first one racist, and a guy got up to present, and he enacted every stereotype you could imagine in presenting why they weren't racist, like proving the friggin' point.
It was horrible. The worst moment of the whole thing.
Yeah.
The things he said were just
No,
horrible.
they weren't hateful, they were just so stereotypical. And it was like you have some politicians who talk about you people, you know, and I mean, it's that level. It's just like, so we stopped doing that.
But you didn't interrupt him, you didn't correct his language, you didn't try to point out to him that he was not speaking in the best possible way. And I thought that was a very important
It was a foundational moment for us. Now, if somebody were to use inflammatory hate speech, which has not happened, okay, you know, anti-Semitic, the N-word, the flagrant thing, such that the whole room would be like what? Then I would say that's out of line. I would intervene and say that's out of line. And so yes, but it would be on behalf, there would be like something outrageous just happens, and chances are somebody would have been losing it, and I'd have to intervene at that point. But the bar is pretty high, and that's not ever happened in one of our workshops yet, okay? And so we have to rely, there's a rough and tumble quality to democracy and to civic deliberation. And we're not going to be, we're not going to be, well, you go on with it.
This helps me, just this little thing I have in my head about permissive and authoritative. Because what I've learned in trying to do this and learned from Bill is when you're permissive and when you're authoritative. We are permissive when it comes to letting people say what they want to say, the way they want to say it. We do not try to correct insensitivities. We do not try to make sure that nobody's upset by anything anybody says. We don't do any of that. We just let them be. We're permissive. We are authoritative I think to an unusual degree when one of the ground rules gets broken. Then Bill, and we've learned this, we're on it. The minute you start delivering your editorial, I'm interrupting you. So you're not finishing the sentence. So this combination of to what degree we're permissive, because these are citizens who have sometimes hard things to say, and they say it the way they want to say it, and we're not there to teach them how to say it any better. Permissive, but authoritative when we are enforcing the ground rules that everybody's agreed to. We're on it. And so to me, that's a helpful.
With the exception of flagrant hate speech, that hasn't happened. But if that did happen, and the closest that anything came was in your world, where, and I won't go into all the details, but her community was so inflamed about street signs. Hate has no home here. And we were doing just a 3-hour workshop. There were 60 observers, the whole town was, and after the stereotypes exercise, which I thought would take care of it, the Reds were begging us to try something different, and so we decided to do the fishbowl around that topic, around what was happening. I mean, and who knows if it was a mistake or not, but we just said, they really need it, they want it, we're going to give it a try. So I designed the fishbowl that way. And in the middle of that fishbowl, one of the Reds, so the Reds felt, the conservatives felt that this was personal, it was about them as haters, and the liberals thought they were just making a statement about hate in the world, but it was tearing up the community. And in the red fishbowl that went first, people told stories about their kids being bullied and neighbors cutting them off, and just some very painful stories. And then one guy, you remember this one guy? You do, he was there. He said,
A blue.
a blue. No, no.
Yeah.
No, a blue.
A
A blue. A blue.
A blue set.
Said, whoever started this should be run out of town. Whoever started it was sitting out there. Okay? And so this was a little inflammatory? Okay, so this was the only time, and we were outside of our comfort zone. We were doing something we'd never done. But he said that, and then I sat forward on my chair, and I called him by name, and I said, Andy, you're getting really ramped up. What you just said is really inflammatory, and I need you to ramp this down now. And he did.
Just the other quick moment on this, it's so dramatic to me. It was a red who said that. I thought it was a red.
I know his name.
Yeah, you were.
It was a red who said it.
I apologize.
Yeah. This is on tape, so don't say his name. It was a red.
It was a red, and I thought you were going to tell
Yeah.
a different story, which I'm going to tell very quickly now. One of the blues was very moved by what had been said by the Reds. And I'm just going to say he said, well, I have one of those signs, and now that I know that it's causing this much pain, I'm going to take mine down. And applause began to erupt from the people outside, the Reds who were sitting outside. And at the first clap of the hand, Bill stood up and said, do not do that. And I stood up simultaneously, and no. And it shut down, and it was a great moment, because if that had been allowed to continue even 2 seconds longer, I think it might have been the end of the meeting, and it was really, so anyway.
So that was, you're not going to do one of those, but there have been times when a observer interrupts, and I just stop them cold. No iMessages, no nothing. You're to be quiet. You're to be quiet. They know the ground rules. Like at one thing, one was said, I had already said, like this big group of observers, I say, move, if you can't hear, move up, but I'm not going to ask these people to shout, really. So a woman said, out of the blue, somebody was talking, chick's doing this thing, and she said, I can't hear, and I said, move up. And I just boom, okay? So you don't accept anything from those outsiders. Last thing, and then we're going to take another break.
So I observed something when they did the Leesburg, when I was at the Leesburg.
Yeah.
I was an observer. And it was in the small group where, after the questions for the other side, and then it was a mixed group that came back together.
Yeah.
And at one point, one of the blues, a woman talked about her identity as a lesbian and the rights that she wants for herself and her family. And one of the Reds responded in a very intellectual way, talking about how she doesn't have those rights, essentially, was what he was saying.
Yeah, he was thinking in some sort of constitutional law sense or something.
And she was devastated emotionally.
Yeah.
And it was very upsetting for me to watch, but what I got from how you're talking now is that you allow those repairs to happen during the breaks.
Yeah, he went up to her. He saw what happened. There was a break soon, and he went up and talked to her. He didn't know if it worked. There's, people bring lots of things, okay? And when he tried, he went over to her, and he really did try.
I was there with both of them.
Yeah, and I don't know that it repaired,
Yeah.
but he was not delivering hate speech.
Right.
He was not saying, these faggots should go back to, then I would have been, whoa, right? He was, you're right, he was being very intellectual. He was a Tea Party founder, intellectual college professor. And it was sort of like, technically speaking, from a constitutional standpoint, there's no protection for gay people. And this was a woman who's afraid of losing her kids. And that's a perfect example. I know how to intervene on that, okay? If I'm a therapist, if I'm a mediator, if I'm in a bunch of different roles, it would be, okay, let's slow down. Okay? And were you aware when you said that of the impact, okay? And could you talk about how that felt? And then I know, George, so what were you trying to do, George? So, George, do you see? That's my couples therapy. And I'm not going to do that here. And I'm going to just trust that these people come to civic dialogue. Democracy is messy. And the guardrails are here. The guardrails are here, not here. So, one more thing and then we'll stop.
Yeah, I just,
Thank
that's
you
a
for bringing that.
perfect
It's
example.
a great example. We use that in the future.
I'll just be a little, if a moderator was to intervene at that point to try to explain to this guy why what he did was insensitive, the ballgame's over for us. No more Reds come to our workshops, period. Our initiative is over. That's how serious I want to be about this. So.
Well, on that note, in fact, if you were even thinking of intervening, we can't read your thoughts, but you might want to leave at the break. You understand?
Can I just share an anecdote? So we just talk about difficult moments, but a lot of times with these difficult moments, there'll actually be really good stories that come out of this. So I'll just give one. The first workshop that we did. So they were talking about the time when this person who was supposed to be talking about why racism is a stereotype of Republicans, and then went on to repeat a lot of racist stereotypes. So that person at the end of the workshop said, I came in here as a white person from a mostly white town, who knew mostly white people, and I didn't get the fear from those who voted against Trump. And I was just so baffled for it. He said, now, he said, I think I understand. Really remarkable. And he also said, he said, I think that, for me, he said, it seems to me like we all came in here and we kind of peeped over the fence and looked at each other and saw that we're not as far apart as maybe we thought we were. So he was starting to see some coming out. He was really being vulnerable and honest. So despite that very hard thing. The other thing, the African-American woman who participated in that workshop, very difficult, at the end of the one day, she said, oh, this was brutal. And one of the Republican leaders heard her say that, went up to her and said, oh, tell me. And then they had this wonderful conversation, and there was a good moment there. And then it turns out that many of you heard the NPR podcast about Better Angels. The African-American woman, she was one of the 2 Better Angels on that podcast talking about that workshop. So some really, some of these moments are really difficult, but some really powerful things also happen to people who are in these moments.
Okay.